what I do with most of my perimenopausal clients. I call it the 3 H's. It's heavy, hypertrophy, heart raising. So heavy is where you combine these 3 things within your workout, and anybody can do this off the back of this. You go heavy with a compound lift. So let's say a deadlift, 6 reps. Then you go straight into a hypertrophy move, which is your most metabolically designed parameters for training. That's 8 to 10 reps. So you're doing 8 to 10 reps, but you're failing at 8, you're failing at 9, or you're failing at 10. Maybe you're doing that with a shoulder press. And then you're doing a heart raiser. So that might be an air squat, a mountain climber, maybe squat jumps if your body can tolerate it for 30 seconds. You're pairing those 3 things together. So you're hitting the trifecta in terms of body composition change for perimenopause. You're hitting the heavy, which is the bone density and metabolic impact. You're hitting hypertrophy, which is purely metabolic in terms of you're tearing muscle fibers down, so your body has to repair and your metabolism has to elevate in order to repair from it. And you're getting your heart rate up, which is going to improve and potentially help with your insulin sensitivity.
Alongside the skin journey for so many women is also a fitness journey, right? Because it is that outward appearance, our face that we're showing, our body that we're showing. And in this health and wellness space, we want to be able to feel good and feel confident. And that also includes some type of fitness. But I find for a lot of women, they struggle a little bit with their fitness because of the inundation of information online. So we wanted to make sure that if we were bringing in an expert to talk about fitness, it was a legit expert that worked with women's fitness. So we're going to be welcoming the lovely Brian Keane out of Ireland. And we know he's legit. He's got 4 best-selling books. He has a #1 ranked podcast, Brian Keane Podcast. You're going to see him talking at events, his ever-growing social media platforms, over 500,000 followers. You go check him out. You know he knows what he's talking about. So Brian, thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
An absolute pleasure, Katie and Cris. I'm really looking forward to this.
You actually started telling a little bit of a story of how you got into fitness. So I'm curious, what was that really big factor that pushed you into this?
Yeah, it's such an interesting full circle moment, as I said right before we went on air. So I had horrible acne as a teenager. And when I was 13 and 14 years of age, I got put onto myosin, which is like an acne drug. And it gave me horrible depression, it gave me suicidal ideation. I had probably all the worst symptoms you could get from that particular drug. It did clear up my skin to a degree, but kind of at what cost when I look back in hindsight. And interestingly enough, it gave me a lot of issues with my gut, and it got me curious about fitness, eating better, eating more whole foods, trying to fix a combination of my gut, my skin, and my mental health. And that's actually what led me down the path of getting interested in the gym, working out, moving more, and eating a more holistic and living a more holistic lifestyle, even from a very, very young age. So I joined the gym when I was 16 years of age. I've been going 5 days a week for the past 22 years. It's part of my life now. It's part of my routine. It led me to eating much better food. I was able to fix a lot of those underlying gut issues. The skin conditions went away as a byproduct of me living a much more healthier lifestyle. I know obviously there's a hormonal element as a teenager, but as an adult, I have thankfully no issues with my skin now because of the nutrition, the food, and the way that I live. But it's very, very interesting that sometimes it's that cosmetic, that appearance, that issue that leads us down the path we're supposed to be on. And it was very, very true in my case.
I know I always tell our clients that I'm so thankful I had acne because had I not had it, it wouldn't have motivated me enough to go and take account of my health. And that's really when you're fixing your skin is you're rebalancing all of those body systems.
100%. It's so, as you mentioned, like your skin's your biggest organ. Like, so it's such an important aspect when you think of, when I cover a lot with fitness, I work predominantly with female fitness in that kind of more so the perimenopausal age range because there's hormonal change there on the other side from teenage years all the way up. But we cover it from kind of a, reduction of belly fat, stomach fat, increasing bone density, metabolic rate, all those things that can potentially become an issue as women get older and move into a new season of life. And it's so interesting that it kind of mirrors what happened in early life, just in the reverse. It's very cool to be drawing all these connections and all these dots.
I love that you're taking a very holistic approach to fitness, right? It's not just about lifting these weights, doing these exercises. It's about the mindset, it's about the nutrition, it's about the whole being.
100%. The biggest thing for me, and I qualified as a personal trainer and a nutritionist nearly 13 years ago now. I was a primary school teacher by trade. That was my quote unquote real job in a former life of mine. And I worked with school children, and that didn't really make me feel super fulfilled, although it was a nice job. And I love working with the kids. It wasn't my passion. It wasn't my soul calling. It wasn't the thing I was supposed to be doing. And getting a career and moving into a career in fitness and going down the qualification route of nutrition and fitness in particular. So it was movement, gym, workouts, etc., and then the nutrition. But as I progressed pretty early on in that journey, 2, 3, 4 years in, I started to see that there was way more pieces that were missing, that it wasn't just working out in the gym or moving and getting your step count up. And it wasn't just food, although that's a huge element of it. There was all these other factors, your sleep, your mindset, your stress management, your supplementation to a degree. That's a tiny, tiny 1% at the top, but they make a big difference when you've got all the other big rocks and pillars in place. And what I tried to do with my platforms over the years, from social media to the podcast particularly, was bridge and merge these worlds for people so that they could see that it's not just about eating this way. And, a pet peeve of mine as a nutritionist is people just tracking calories and not looking at nutrient density in food, and then wondering why their gut is off, their energy is off, their skin is off, their hormonal balance is off, all these factors. And there's so much more to consider, because a lot of individuals who struggle with nutrition, it's not the food that's the problem, it's their sleep. And they're not sleeping well, and then they have a down regulation in their hormonal system. Their leptin and ghrelin are dysregulated, their hunger and satiation hormones, and then that's leading them to go off plan on their nutrition. And if that's having a negative impact on the sleep, and it's compounding negatively. Or those that are struggling with stress management, and they've got these very high levels of cortisol that's just chronic and elevated throughout the day. And again, that negatively impacts sleep, which again feeds back into this loop that I talked about. So it's all interconnected. And what can be very frustrating for people, I hear it a lot with my perimenopausal women in particular, but this is for general population too, is my perimenopausal audience will say, what worked for me 10 years ago isn't working anymore. And that's because new season of life, hormonal fluctuations, you have to take a new approach, and something we could potentially go into or something not. What I know from working years as a coach with individuals is there's thinking you're doing the right thing and not getting the results and being frustrated by that is one of the most disempowering feelings to have. And I love what you do, Katie and Cris, in terms of educating people on the holistic element and looking at all these angles. And I try and do the same with my content, that yes, maybe your nutrition is good and your fitness is okay in terms of your movement and your training, but how's your sleep? How's your stress? How's your supplementation? How are your hormonal fluctuations based on the season of life? And drawing and bridging the gap between not knowing what's wrong and filling in that gap so that there's not that frustration, because that's so, as I mentioned, disempowering. It leads to sabotaging behaviors and tendencies. And then that's just not a nice way to move to the world. It reduces your frequency, your vibration. It's just about lifting everything so that people can literally look the way they want, feel the way they want, increase their vitality, increase their energy, feel confident in themselves, with clothes, without clothes. And that's been my message for more than a decade.
I'm telling you guys, didn't we say we were gonna bring in the best fitness person for our audience, and we absolutely nailed it. And what's so funny, Brian, is Cris and I, weren't we just having this conversation about Cris is like, "I'm going back to a workout class tonight, but it's gonna be the Cris from 10 years ago is gonna work out so much more differently than the Cris today," right?
It has to. You have to know your limits too, right? That's part of the evolution of life. At my age, the thing is I don't need to go hard and fast and different things, right? I have a whole different schematic of how I live, of my environment. I have teenage kids. I mean, you want to talk about cortisol, just give me 3 bottles right there for each of those children. But those are those that's the difference of it, right? It's like I need to go with motion and movement and progressive resistance training. And I know this. Why? Because one, I'm educated, and two, because I don't need to burn those other hormones. And one thing I need to nail here is I love how you're like the dysregulation of your hormones. And you brought up leptin and ghrelin. You did not say, oh, estrogen, because that's the falsity is nobody knows that we have 50 plus hormones in our body. They're just thinking, what's my estrogen doing? And that's almost a disservice to the body, whether it's acne, whether it's fitness. Does it play a role? Yeah. But even precursor is, are you having bowel movements? Are you reintoxicating? Are you able to do different things with regards to shifting all those hormones without even supplementation? Like you said, it's 1%.
What's so interesting, I think, just as a broad overview for people, like you said, in terms of the hormonal system, they're like dominoes as well. Like one knocks on to the other, and people get confused. And I totally get where this comes from, because the nature of something like social media is it's very short form. One of the reasons I love podcasting so much. And again, similar to you guys, I've got a very, very highly ranked podcast, one of the top 0.5% podcasts globally in the world. We've been doing it a long time. We've had some fantastic people. We've been blessed with the growth of that show. But what podcast does is it allows you to give context and allows you to go deeper. And on social media, people are like, oh, cortisol, take ashwagandha. Oh, estrogen, do this. Insulin, do this. And I wish I could just tattoo to the world, for every female particularly, but men as well, is it's not isolated. Nothing in fitness and health and wellness is a silo in and of itself. Things knock on and have knock on effects like dominoes, and the hormonal system is just one example of that. And I don't mean to confuse people, but also I don't want to encourage or increase frustration when people are doing something that they think is correct and they think is right and it's not working. And that leads back into this negative feedback loop of, oh, well, it's not working. I'm so frustrated. And then people have their own coping mechanisms of, potentially eating, drinking more alcohol, numbing out with TV, lack of movement, and all these things can compound. And it's not so straightforward, but just it's about understanding the broad aspect. What do you need to do that's going to help in this scenario? Your big pillars, your big rocks, your true force multipliers. What's the one thing that impacts everything else? I'm very biased towards sleep because of the hormonal regulation, the more energy movement the next days, the adherence to nutrition protocols makes everything so much easier. So I'm biased towards that personally. But again, for somebody else, it might be stress management. It might be just regulating your nervous system because the kids have been going crazy all day and learning those techniques that regulate you fast, whether it's vagus nerve breathing or something in terms of gratitude journaling and shifting your mindset towards positive affirmations. Different things regulate different people's nervous systems based on categories and what gets them all ramped up. So it's about experimenting with these things and then doubling down on what works, but taking a holistic view and not taking fitness or health and wellness in a silo.
100%. And I love that you focus so heavily on sleep because we talk about sleep all the time. It's like just put us on repeat because people, I think, don't understand or maybe just don't value how important sleep is because your day actually started yesterday when you went to bed. If you're not getting enough sleep, it's going to have that domino effect in your day where you're waking up groggy, you're not feeling motivated. So you're going to have a cup of coffee and then you're not going to eat. Then you're going to binge on food later. Then you're not going to be motivated. Then you're going to skip your movement because you're tired. And then you're going to stay up late because you're wired and tired. And then the whole cycle starts all over again.
When I think back, and I don't mean to pull this back to a personal story, but that's literally how I lived when I worked as a teacher. That was my entire system. It was caffeine too late in the day. I didn't even understand things like the half life of caffeine and caffeine sensitivity. So caffeine's got about a 5.5 hour half life for the majority of people. There's different genetic components that are going to move it through their system faster. People on an ADHD spectrum tend to handle the stimulants in a different way. So there's a lot of different considerations here, but for the majority, people will have about a 5.5 hour half life. So if you have a cup of coffee at 12 o'clock, half that cup of coffee, to 100 mcgs potentially is in your system at half five. Now shift your cup of coffee to 4 p.m. because you're exhausted and you're staring at the ceiling at nighttime, wondering why you can't fall asleep. I was one of those teachers that was I'd be exhausted after school. I'd have books to mark. I'd have parent teacher meetings, etc. I'd have a cup of coffee at 5 o'clock. And then I would go to the gym and I'd normally have another cup of coffee before I train because I wanted to work out. And then I'd be staring at the ceiling at nighttime, tired and wired. And then the next day, the whole cycle would start itself again. I would need something sugary in the morning to get myself going. I'd need more caffeine and stimulants. And then I'd get a mini reset at the weekend. And then the whole thing would start again on Monday. And it's interesting because there's education and awareness is the first step. So knowing that it's a problem in terms of what's causing it, that's the first. And then actually being able to execute, which is your behaviors, your habits, your pattern interruptions, and making sure that you're creating new pathways for what you want in terms of habit formation. But very, very important for people to consider because you're looking for the thing that is going to have the most or the biggest impact on you. Both of you mentioned the importance of sleep. It might be just taking your cup of coffee back to earlier in the day. It might be having some form of grounding or meditation or journaling practice before bed so that you can switch your brain off and not confusing, mental tiredness and physical tiredness. They're two very, very different things. You'll have people who will struggle to sleep and have a good night's sleep because they're physically or they feel mentally tired because they've been in the office all day. They haven't had any blue light from the sun or they haven't got any light from the sun, and they come home at 5 p.m. and they're exhausted and they're just tired when they're not actually physically tired, they're mentally tired. And then they go to bed and they get like cortisol driven second wind. And then they're like 10:30 comes, circadian rhythm in terms of a dysregulation of sleep. And it's just like, doop, they're staring at the ceiling going, I'm not tired anymore. I nearly fell asleep on the couch at 6 p.m. and now I'm just staring at the ceiling. Understanding tips and tricks and protocols like movement patterns in the early evening, whether it's, an intensive session all the way to a class, to a yoga or Pilates session or some mindful movement, that can help a lot with sleep. So you're looking at these relatively straightforward and easy tips and tricks that you can incorporate into daily life that will yield very big benefits in terms of change. And I would start with sleep because, as you mentioned, it's nearly the foundation of everything else.
It helps with regulating your nervous system. It helps with bringing your cortisol down. So it's having that really beautiful domino effect. I think it's such an overlooked pillar, but I think in our society that we live in is you almost get a badge of honor for not sleeping. It's like, oh, well, I only got 3 hours last night. And you're like, oh, okay, but you're still surviving. And it's this cultural, societal thing that we need to move away from.
I lived in the States for years and I lived in the UK for a long time. I'm in Ireland now, in the west of Ireland. And I travel quite a lot for speaking and engagement, still to the US, less so now in more recent years because it's been a bit up and down and it's harder to travel there. But historically, I've traveled quite a lot. And there seems to be a gradual shift away from that now, slowly and badly needed. That hustle grinding culture. And I'm the first one to be like, look, go work hard. The dream is free. The hustle is what you pay for, and go build the life you want to build and build the body you want to build and build whatever dream you have. But try and do it with 8 hours of sleep or some variation of like a high quality sleep, because it's just going to make everything else feel easier. I was a 4 a.m. or a 5 a.m. I lived that life. It's great because you feel like you've got more hours in the day. But looking back in hindsight to a decade ago, I'm like, actually, I was exhausted during the day and I wasn't thinking as clearly. I wasn't as productive. I was confusing movement with progress. And what happens with sleep is you're feeling better generally. So you're producing more, which means that you're showing up in a different way with your family, with your friends, with your work, and it feels more fulfilling. And then again, shifting vibration, shifting frequency, and you're just feeling better throughout the day. A lot of that starts to sleep. And again, I don't want to preach at anybody because I lived the alternative lifestyle thinking it was the right way. And now, kind of having done a 180 on it and seeing the benefit, I'm like, it's just something to experiment with. If you're in a different season of life, early 20s, mid 20s, and you're go, 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 like I probably wouldn't have listened to the 37, 38-year-old me anyway, in terms of like, I'm not sleepy and I've got stuff to do. But again, for everyone else that's listening, I know it's kind of people who have a different season of life, that sleep is the foundation and the bedrock for everything else. And it just makes life doesn't get any easier. Life is hard, family's hard, kids are hard, work is hard, life is hard. But having a good night's sleep, in my experience, does make those things feel easier.
Well, without it, it just compounds that hard. I say, one, sleep is free. So that's great. And secondly, if everything in your life feels hard, what free applications can you put in to switch the ones to reduce the hard? Because I will tell you, when I sleep, I'm just nicer to myself, even because our own worst critics. And part of this is we talked about that cycle and that mindset. But half the cycle when you don't sleep is the cynical you. I'm not being productive. I didn't go to the gym. I didn't prepare the food. I'm failing, I'm failing, I'm failing, I'm failing. And then what's the point? And our hands go up in the air, and then we go to the fridge and we pull out the ice cream and we sit there and we're like, then I might as well. And I want to watch people as they do that, because when we're working with clients, that's true. I'm pretty sure you've seen it a zillion times. We see it. The thing that we really work on is, of course, we do the core foundations of nutrition and the core, we add some supplements and whatever, but we definitely preach on things with regards to the free aspects, right? And this is like you said, like the hustle and the bustle, transformation has to come because the world right now doesn't have much more. I don't have much more give in my schedule because I'm running around. So then what do? I have to look for other people. I have to look for carpool. We don't do that. We just say, oh, okay, well, and you work with a lot of ladies. And what do ladies do? Okay, well, just put it here and just put it here and I'll carry it. Get me a backpack because it's going to be easier. I'm going to add to the backpack. Oh my gosh, can you get me the oversized pants? Because I'll just put everything into the pockets. Next thing you know, we're slowly slothing our way through the day because we refuse to give up anything. It's not because we don't want help. We do. It's we've learned or adapted to the coping mechanisms of, if you ask for help, you're disservicing yourself, like you're weak, you can't handle it. So I really see with teenage kids now, that's coming out. The Gen Zs aren't putting up with that, which I love because they're going to teach the rest of us a valuable lesson. They do. They have boundary setting, as my kid's like this with her phone for like 14 hours a day, right? Boundary setting less the phone, right? But these are those things, So that's just something I want to just kind of grind into people is, if it's hard, look for the free applications, like asking, like sleeping.
The free applications and sleep being free. And it's very interesting. One of the core philosophies that I put across with everyone I work with, but also just online in terms of conversations, podcasts, is a combination of trying to be kinder to yourself, but also knowing you can't give from an empty cup. And my mum's particularly, and I see this, my mum is an amazing woman. My daughter's mother is a great woman. I've got very good women in my life. My sister's a mother, but I see it a lot with clients where everybody else gets put first. The family, sons, daughters, husbands, particularly wives, if the other person gets put first. And one of the things I try and instill, or at least get them to consider, is when you're on an airplane and they're giving out the instructions at the beginning and the air masks come down, the face masks come down, what's the first thing they tell you? Secure your mask, then secure your kids, and then secure people around you. I don't know, is it societal or just default programming, somewhere along the lines, or maybe evolutionary? I don't know. I'm not schooled enough in evolutionary psychology of social tribes all the way down to thousands of years ago, but maybe there's an element of that in it as well, of putting everybody else first. What I try and get people to consider, what would life look like if you put yourself first? Because most people have a resistance to that. Going, oh no, I couldn't do that. No, I couldn't do that. And then I say, no, just ask that question again. What would life look like if you put yourself first? And they normally go, okay, well, I'd get my workouts in. I'd look after my food. I'd probably be sleeping better. It's kind of those three things that tend to come up most often, a variation of those. And then I go, well, how would you feel if you were doing really well in those things? And the answer is normally, well, I think I'd have more energy. I'd be less stressed. I'd probably feel better. And then I go, how do you think you'd show up as a wife or as a mother if you were feeling that level of energy and that level of vitality? And then they go, ah, okay, I get it. And a lot of that routine, from my experience, starts with just being kinder to yourself. Speaking of things that you can do for free, we have eviscerating self-critics, a lot of us. Some of them are very, very loud. Some of them are kind of just nibbling at us in terms of a low voice, but they're there. I've written 2 books on this in terms of the mindset and speaking to yourself, not letting your 2 biggest enemy live between your 2 ears. And something that's free but very difficult to adopt is being kinder to yourself. And if you think about all the times during the day when you beat yourself up, whether you've had a good anchor with a night's sleep or not, people still beat themselves up. They go and have too many cookies. They go off plan with their nutrition. They miss a workout. They do something. They shout at their kids. They show up in a way that they didn't expect to show up if they were waving or writing out a perfect plan for the day. And then the inner critic comes up, the guilt, the shame, the negative voice in your head. And I regularly tell mothers, the way you speak to yourself, would you ever speak to your child? And not one in years of working with people has anyone ever said, no, I speak worse to my children than to myself. No one's ever said that. Yeah. And in terms of just illumination and the way you speak to yourself and just being kinder, like one thing that I did, this is a kind of an outside tip for people, particularly people who struggle with kind of low self-worth in themselves. So this might not be applicable to everybody, but something as simple as like get a photo, like a physical photo, not on your phone, maybe on your phone, but a physical photo of yourself when you were a child, when you were 4 years old, 5 years old. Put it in your wallet, put it in your purse, put it somewhere where you can physically see it. Maybe an app on the phone or just somewhere on the phone, somewhere that's very easily to access. The next time you do something that's out of alignment with what you said you were going to do, you ate too much ice cream, you missed a workout, and you're about to start beating yourself up, pull that picture out and look at it and go, would I speak to this child the way I'm about to speak to myself right now? And in a lot of cases, that serves as a pattern interrupt. It's just enough of a breakdown between I'm going to go on my normal conditioning and programming to the way that I've always taught, and this issue of the way that I speak because I didn't do the thing I said I was going to do. And a pattern interrupts, and you look at yourself as a younger child and go, okay, actually, I wouldn't start saying you're stupid, you're an idiot, you can't stick to anything, you're a failure, you did it again. I wouldn't do that with this child. That's a useful tool to start being a little bit kinder to yourself. And sometimes the foundation and the bedrock and the layer to being kinder to yourself first and foremost, and then not giving from an empty cup on top of it. As important as training and nutrition and sleep and supplementation and all these things are, if these aren't right, it doesn't really matter what you're doing, because you're going to end up self-sabotaging or falling off track down the line anyway, or you're going to do it begrudgingly. And life is too short to stack hards on top of hards, to echo what Cris said. So I just wanted to add that as something that might be somewhat practical to lay as a foundation.
I think it's so important, right? Is we're building these different layers. And, when we have the mindset, we're working on the sleep and we get to that spot where, okay, now we're the fitness part, we're working out. And what are kind of the fitness based components that you're helping those perimenopausal women when they're like, oh, well, I used to go and run on a treadmill for an hour and a half in my 20s. Like, what is the difference that you're showing them?
This would probably speak directly to Cris, because she was nodding when I was speaking. As I said, the language I get is what worked for me 10 years ago doesn't work anymore. What's so interesting about the perimenopausal demographic in general. And I use a lot of research and evidence to support what I say because I'm a practitioner, but I also geek out on the topic. So I like to be well informed. I don't like just throwing random darts against a dartboard and assuming things will work. I like using the evidence and research to support it. One of the things that was very curious to me when I came across this 2 years ago, a lot of this was kind of being pioneered, Dr. Stacey Sims, individuals who were focusing on perimenopausal and menopausal women, because most of the research done within fitness has historically been done on young men, normally in the 30 age range, 30 to 35 age range. Makes so much sense. They don't have a monthly cycle. They're diurnal creatures. It's much easier to do tracking and research on those individuals. So intermittent fasting, training protocols, etc. So most of the research that you come across historically up until the last few years has been done on men, and then women have been applying it. Women are not small men. Like, so there's a completely different physiological set point in terms of how they're designed. We know this, you know this, everybody listening knows it as soon as it's said, yet we see something on social media and we go, oh, okay, I'm going to do intermittent fasting because I saw this research in this study, not knowing it was done on, a meta-analysis across the board on men in their 30s. So with perimenopausal women, what's so interesting is everybody else I work with outside of that demographic, I go nutrition first, training after. Sleep is a given, as we've said. With perimenopausal women, I go training first, nutrition after, which is really, really interesting, because what happens is part of the reason that you're struggling, or women in perimenopausal age range are struggling to reduce body fat, particularly around their stomach, that whole region, and it's just like what they did 10 years ago doesn't work anymore, is because of the hormonal dysregulation. And we know that you can minimize that with nutrition to a degree. You can eat healthy fats, complete protein sources, nutrient-dense foods, but in that season of life, it's normally not enough. So what you need is different stressors when you're training, and they come into different protocols. One is lifting heavy, compound lifts, particularly your deadlifts, your squat, your military press, your variations of multi-joint exercises, but lifting heavy. So normally 5-6 reps, which isn't something a lot of women will do unless they've got a background in sport or a background in powerlifting. They tend to not lift that heavy where they're failing at 5 reps or 6 reps and then resting for 90 seconds, 2 minutes in between. That's the first thing. One, it increases and has a positive impact on bone density, but it also impacts metabolic rate in a positive way. So what happens as you come into perimenopause, you can find that there's a decrease in metabolism. And the language I'll hear is, oh, my metabolism's broken, my metabolism stalled, my metabolism is not operating the way it should, all variations of this. And part of that is true. There is a hormonal dysregulation for a slowdown in metabolism. So what you want to do is you want to increase that metabolic rate. And training is what does that. One of my biggest pet peeves, thank God they're gone now, was the metabolic boosting teas and things like that. And it drove me, I felt like shaking my screen every time I saw it, because your metabolism is such a complex thing that a tea doesn't boost it. Now, there's things you can do, sleeping well, hormone regulation, all that will impact metabolism. But in terms of your biggest bang for your buck and the thing that's going to help, it's your strength training, particularly within that rep range and going heavier for perimenopausal age range. The second thing you want to do is you need to get your heart rate up when you are perimenopausal. If you are a cross trainer person, where you've been going to the gym and doing a lot of cardio, which is grand, you're getting your heart rate to 70%. It's nice, slow and steady, works perfectly fine. Earlier stage of life, when you were in your 20s, in your 30s, calories were burning, losing a bit of body fat, controlling for deficit, and it was reducing body fat. It's pretty straightforward for the most part. That stops having the same impact when you hit late 30s, early 40s, mid 40s, and beyond. So what you want to do is you want to get your heart rate very high. A really good way to do this is through a variation of plyometrics if your body can tolerate it. So plyometrics is your jump training, your squat jumps, your jumping lunges. The downside of that, and this is where coaches come in, is if you're 42, 43, 44, you might have knee issues, you might have hip issues, you might have ankle issues. You're in a different season of life. Hormonal dysregulation in terms of estrogen means your risk of injury can go up. So plyometrics can be an issue for certain demographics there. So this is a proceed with caution. But even if you can't do the plyometric and the jumps, you want to be doing something that's really jacking up your heart rate. There's a protocol that anybody can apply. This is what I do with most of my perimenopausal clients. I call it the 3 H's. It's heavy, hypertrophy, heart raising. So heavy is where you combine these 3 things within your workout, and anybody can do this off the back of this. You go heavy with the compound lift. So let's say a deadlift, 6 reps. Then you go straight into a hypertrophy move, which is your most metabolically designed parameters for training. That's 8 to 10 reps. So you're doing 8 to 10 reps, but you're failing at 8, you're failing at 9, or you're failing at 10. Maybe you're doing that with a shoulder press. And then you're doing a heart raiser. So that might be an air squat, a mountain climber, maybe squat jumps if your body can tolerate it for 30 seconds. You're pairing those three things together. So you're hitting the trifecta in terms of body composition change for perimenopause. You're hitting the heavy, which is the bone density and metabolic impact. You're hitting hypertrophy, which is purely metabolic in terms of you're tearing muscle fibers down, so your body has to repair and your metabolism has to elevate in order to repair from it. And you're getting your heart rate up, which is going to improve and potentially help with your insulin sensitivity. That can be another issue for women in perimenopause, is they're a little bit more insulin resistant. You can also control this with nutrition, but a lot of women find that even when they go high fat, low carb, they're still not getting body fat down because they need to hit it from a training aspect as well. Elevating your heart rate can do this. When you pair those three things together, you can design your entire workout plan around that 40-minute plan, 45-minute plan with those principles 2, 3, 4 times a week, and you'll start to see things moving again.
And it's so simple, these things, right? When you really pull it back, it's the simplicity of those 3 H's that you're working into your routine. And it's not about just going and spending 20 minutes on the elliptical or the treadmill.
Says a 35-year-old you. I'm exhausted listening to that. Like, I don't know what's happening here. I'm like stressing over these H's. I'm like, man.
Keep it very easy, Cris. If you think of just even to design it out yourself, because I always tell people, look, most of the stuff that you'll get from coaches, you can do yourself. It's just the coaches help with the accountability, they help with the filtering, they help with working around things. Is list of all the compound lifts. So that's your deadlift, that's your squat, that's potentially a bench press, that's a bent over row, that's a military press. There are 5 exercises. So that's 5 straight away. You've got your hypertrophy, which can be any exercise. So that's your shoulder press. That might be a bicep curl. That might be a lunge or a split squat, a Bulgarian split squat, a goblet squat. Like, it's just, again, the variations of hypertrophy ranges. They're still compound lifts, but hypertrophy ranges. And then your heart raisers, think it's just body weight. Mountain climbers, air squats, squat jumps, jumping lunges, anything along those areas. And all you're doing then is just pairing them together like a pick and mix. And anybody can do that. And of course, the order matters. To say it wouldn't be true either, because you've got injuries, you've got priorities and body parts that you want to focus on more than others. You might have an underlying issue with core strength that you want to focus on. But in terms of just a 0 to 1 starting point for you, Cris, and for people listening, so they can get moving with this, just pick those, do it 3 times in the workout, do 3 sets, 90-second rest, 2-minute rest between. Pick 3 versions of that. That's your whole workout. That's about a 45-minute workout. And then maybe something like a Tabata, if you're a high level trainer, 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off on an exercise bike maybe, and then 50 minutes, whole workout is done. Do that twice a week, 3 times a week, 4 times a week, and you will see your body composition changing, assuming you adjust your nutrition or have a good nutrition and sleep protocol alongside it.
Now that we've moved into that nutrition piece, what are those core nutrition foundations that you're teaching to your women?
Generally, higher fat and higher protein and lower carb tends to be the protocol that works. Now, I need to add an asterisk with this, because starting point matters a great deal and individual adherence matters a great deal. But if we're working off best principles for what the research says, which makes a lot of sense when we plant it and say it out loud, high fat, high protein, moderate to low carb. With protein, that's your building block for everything. Most people know protein, particularly high quality protein, it's not all created equal. So the protein you're getting in a protein bar is going to be different to chicken breast, which is going to be different to, free range eggs that you're eating. The amino acid profile, etc., is going to be different. The absorption, the bioavailability of what your body will absorb is going to be different. So you obviously want to go with whole foods as much as possible, and then you're going down the processed area as like nearly a last resort if that's the case. Again, I'm not anti-processed food. I think people have probably too much in their diet and they could do removing it. It's probably the one nutritional piece of advice I can say without any issue and context is people will do better eating more whole foods and less processed food. Everything else is context dependent on the individual, but that's kind of a blanket statement that's relatively true for the majority. But with protein, making that moderately high. Again, it's all relative depending on training program. So again, nice little starting point depending on how active you are training. With fat then, what you're looking for is high quality fats in terms of your food sources. On top of hormonal regulation, and which is absolutely key in perimenopause, what it does is it helps control for calories, satiation between meals so that you're feeling fuller. And it normally by proxy will keep you feeling fuller so that you don't need as many carbohydrates. Now, I'm not an anti-carbohydrate person, definitely not. The context is key. But the research around women in perimenopause is that they're going to be mildly more insulin resistant. It's actually the reason that they're storing a lot of the body fat and they're struggling with it because of the hormonal fluctuations during that season of life. It's kind of like bouncers at a door of a nightclub. If you're insulin sensitive, the bouncer's like, come on in, everyone come on in. You're, i.e., letting in the carbohydrates in, your body can use it for fuel. It's like the bouncer in a nightclub saying, come on in. Insulin resistant is when the nightclub bouncer is like, no, you can't come in. No. So the carbohydrate's not getting into the fuel. You're not using it as it's intended for energy. And then it starts to circulate the body and cause a whole host of issues from type 2 diabetes all the way down to weight gain. So again, a lot of things in between that. During perimenopause, there's a good chance that your insulin sensitivity is going to be reduced and your insulin resistance is going to be higher. So by going with higher fat and higher protein, you're covering the nutritional angle of improving your insulin sensitivity on top of that training that I mentioned with the heavy hypertrophy, heart raising. So when you bridge those two things together, you end up supporting your body with what it needs during this period versus what it needed 10 years ago, where you probably were a lot more insulin sensitive just by nature because of everything being more balanced. And again, I don't want to go one size fits all on that. That's a best practice. There's bridges that people need. If someone's gone very high carbohydrate, moderate protein, low fat most of their life, they're going to really struggle with a direct swap. So you need to bridge it. You start increasing your dietary fat and keeping your carbohydrates moderate, and then gradually start to balance them out until you get the body composition change you want and the kind of energy balance that you want. But that's just the overview. Specificity matters, individual cases matter, but as a best practice, that's the thing to keep in mind.
I just want to bring that all in. The thing is the proteins and the fats and the building blocks, right? Like we need vital minerals from the foods in order to enhance these. So like zinc, even for wound healing and skin and just things like that. So when we're doing it, even if you're waking up in the middle of the night, we want to look. Are you satiated? Did you have your caloric intake? Because we may need to snack with a little bit of fat, maybe some beautiful, well, like I could call them warming carbohydrates, or I call them fiber. So anything that grows in the ground, these types of things. Because when you have that small snack, your body doesn't rely on the cortisol and it starts to panic because now you're going into that insulin sensitivity. We do use glucose in order to restore some things in our body. And if we're glucose deprived, then you're not going to sleep. So there's all in the sleep pattern too, right? So we really, really, really need to look at that nutrition. And I love that you said, Brian, like you need to look at what you're doing now and you need to basically meet yourself where you are, gradually pull yourself up. Because I know I have a thyroid condition. Me at that much protein, guess what's going to happen? Not a whole lot, right? Because I have enzymatic issues, these types of things. So case specific. So I really appreciate you hanging with us because I'm thinking we're all doing the same thing here. You're preaching or speak, that's for sure.
What I think conversations like this do, and I know it'd be Katie the same when you're on mine, is you're hearing similar things from different voices and it cements in a different way where people think, okay, it was said slightly different in this podcast. Cris said it differently, Katie said it differently, Brian said it differently because one of them triggered off the other to say it in a different way and it just landed. And I think ultimately that's what it's all about. It's about providing people with the information, the knowledge, the values so that they can implement it themselves. If they work with you guys, if they work with me, if they work with other coaches, amazing. It just shortens the learning curve, gets people to where they want to get to faster. But ultimately, I think giving the information, let people see what's a fit for them, like the workout stuff I said, like the training, the nutrition, and like you mentioned there is no one size fits all with nutrition. There isn't. There's so many variables when it comes to what you may need in terms of a macro split, a nutrient density split, deficiency splits that you may need to incorporate different foods. So again, everything is always said with the best practice in mind, but ultimately your own biggest guinea pig. So you can experiment with yourself or work with a coach to help you get there. And the frustration is what you're trying to reduce, not the execution, because trying out things and seeing what works and doubling down on what works is a good strategy and protocol. But if it's leading to excessive frustration because of confusion, it's normally time that you need to reach out to somebody, whether that's you two, whether that's me, whether that's another coach, whether that's somebody locally that you've heard about. Ultimately, it's about finding what's going to be a good fit, square pegs into square holes, and hopefully that call to action for people will be exactly what they need to move forward.
Amazing, Brian. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Now, if anyone wants to learn more about what you do, come hang out with you, where can they learn that?
The Brian Keane podcast is my baby. I love my podcast. It's my favorite thing that I do, 100%. And then I'm on all the social channels as well. Brian_Keane_fitness on Instagram is probably the best one. I'm good with DMs. It's the only place you get me directly. Everything else is automated or goes to my assistant. I'm on my Instagram DM, so I'm replying to those myself. And then all my books are on Amazon, everywhere books are found. People can hop over to Instagram, hop over to the podcast, wherever is best for them.
All right, guys, another episode here. We'll see you next week.